Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Namofsky. On today's episode, we're discussing how organized crime manages addiction within its ranks. So, Daniela, this is a very difficult topic. I have to ask you, why did you write this book?
I had a personal situation where I had an addict in my household, in my family, and I decided I had the Sicilian rehab offered to me, and I declined because I wanted to follow the law and do everything legally. And that had disastrous consequences because the way Canada manages addiction is severely lacking. And it made me wonder, had I taken the illegal route, would there have been a better outcome? And I felt that that was a conversation that should be had on paper.
That's very interesting. You and I were talking before about women in the mafia and, how they say that women aren't allowed in the mob, but were completely involved behind the scenes and how that misogyny offended you. So tell us about that.
Well, I think the misogyny was a lie, and I think the women are a lot smarter than it appears, in the sense that I was told women weren't allowed and they had nothing to do with it. And so I felt it was misogynistic and it offended me. Like, I'm smart enough to be a criminal if I wanted. But instead, I learned through watching that sometimes the women, the wives, the mistresses, they had a lot of pull and a lot of say, and often were far more vicious than their male counterparts, but they had plausible deniability. So it was the men that went to prison and got shot, but the women were often, the what they say, behind every great man is a woman. That's very true in those circumstances, at least from what I saw at the time.
And that's interesting because none of that is portrayed in any of the movies that we all grew up with.
No, I remember being a witness in a court trial, a criminal trial, and the hired muscle was on the stand, and they were trying to get him to admit that the gentleman was making him do violent things, but when he was reading the text messages, the violent stuff was coming from the wife.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Revenue Canada now because they're front and center in your life. Why did your father have deep respect for Revenue Canada and he loved the Canada's corporate tax system?
Yeah, and like I said, my father was, involved in criminality when he was a lot younger, but he had a long stretch in prison and that was enough for him. So when he got out, he got very lucky in business, and for the majority of his adult life was law abiding and very successful. And one law that he will not mess with is Canada's tax law. And it's not about not getting caught or because you can't get away with anything. For him, it's philosophical. He believes our tax laws are fair. He has no problem paying into a tax system for the privileges that we enjoy, and he's happy to contribute to that. And that's a stickler. Like, that is, for him, is something he's drilling into me all the time. Pay your taxes, don't mess with your taxes.
Well, Al Capone, wasn't he arrested because he didn't pay his taxes? So those are
But
wise words to live by.
But that's not why. Like, I thought that would be the reason why, but it's not. It actually, for him, is more philosophical. And he says that we have a fair tax system. What he says is that most Canadians don't learn the tax laws to know how to work with them. So, for example, one simple one, I know you love to talk about frugality on the show, is learning how to calculate mileage. How many Canadians lose thousands of dollars every year just because they don't report their mileage properly? And so he says that's not Revenue Canada's fault. That's our fault.
Mhm.
They gave us the framework, work within that framework, and you'll do quite well.
That's really interesting. So we've got about a minute before we go to break. Want to know, we talked about when you were 9 years old. What happened to the other kids of your generation that you grew up with in that paradigm?
Thankfully, the majority went to school and moved on to other things. The ones that did follow suit, most of them are dead or went to prison. But many took their parents' businesses and just ran with it, let go of the criminality end of it, and just turned those into thriving enterprises.
Okay, well that's a good thing though, because it's nice to see that people that were in different situations actually took the positive and went their own positive way. So when we come back, we will keep discussing with Daniela her life, her father, addiction, the mob. And actually, Daniela was working for one of her father's companies. So we're going to find out what happened there when we come back. So please don't go away.